I still have to do something for covers for these pulleys here on the side, and these are the ones that were on the other airframe, and they just don't quite work. They're not quite long enough. My cutout for that cable that comes clean out to here, and this pulley cover stops here. Well, I was thinking about making some new ones out of Kydex, molding them. Actually, this one I think is for the right side. Yeah, it fits the right side better, but it still doesn't cover the hole quite the way I'd like it to. So I'm looking at doing that, and I'd like to cover up some of these other holes too. I've got the two pulleys here on the side, and then there's one in the front for the elevator controls. The one on the front, I could probably use the one that came off the other airframe. It needs to be sandblasted and painted, but it'll work. And there was another pretty good cutout. Well, it wasn't too bad, but I had to cut out here where these seatbelt attach fittings are welded onto the frame down here. I had to cut out a pretty good sized opening there to fit the floorboard down over it, and I wanted to do something with that. So I cut out a couple pieces of Kydex here and put on and fitted that slot in there, so it's pretty darn tight around that tab where it sticks out for that seatbelt attachment. And I just screwed them down with some number 4 machine screws. That closes that gap up, that hole up in there that would allow debris, gurry and stuff to get down in there in that floor. And that floorboard has to fit over that bearing post, and that's a pretty big opening there. And I'd made stuff out of aluminum over that before. I'll see if I can't do something with Kydex, but I'd also like to get a cover for this stick back here so it's protected. What happens sometimes if you get a load in the airplane and it shifts forward, it can jam this stick, and then you get problems flying the airplane. There's also openings in the floor on the front of this torque tube where that other bearing stand is on it, and then there's openings around the floor where the seat bolts into the brackets on the floor. And we'll see what we can do about covering those up. It's real nice to keep that crap from going down in there or into that lower section there. So I measured up a piece of Kydex, or measured this up here, and I cut a piece of Kydex the size that I decided that would fit to cover this groove up here, and come up the sidewall here far enough to get up above that pulley. And I thought I could go ahead and just mold it in place. So I formed kind of a mold around that pulley bracket to give it enough clearance. Something in there to mold against, so I give it plenty of clearance, and tried molding it in here. I took a piece of Kydex and heated it up on with the heat gun, got it good and hot, and brought it over here and tried to mold it in. Well, it almost worked, but it wanted to go down into this trough here, into this groove here that was cut in there. It wanted to kind of go down in there. So I got some pieces of aluminum and put on there to cover that groove up, and also shield from the heat. Put a couple on each side. And then I got some aluminum foil and I put down over this Kydex here, keep it from getting hot, to shield it from the heat. And over this side here, that's what all this stuff was on there. And I tried it again on there, and it still wouldn't work. So I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to go ahead and make a mold and do this outside the airplane on a mold like I did some of the other things. We'll see how that works. I decided to do a little experiment. I took this cover and set it up here on this board, and then heated up a piece of the Kydex and molded it over by hand. And that kind of worked, and I decided to go a little bit farther with that while I was waiting for the glue to dry. And I dug out this little toaster oven. I've got it heated up now. I put that piece of Kydex in there that I'd molded, heated it up, and now it's sunk down to a flat sheet again. This is the cover for the elevator pulley. It goes down in front of the front seat, and I fastened it down to this board. And I got out this vacuum bag. This is a storage bag we got at Costco or someplace to put clothes and stuff in, and then suck all the air out of it for storage. I've got it hooked up to the vacuum cleaner, so I'm going to go ahead and try and see how that works now. I've got that piece of Kydex in there, softened up, so we'll give that a try now. I don't need to keep that vacuum cleaner on. There's a little valve in that bag to keep that closed, so keep the vacuum in there. No point in having that noise on there. But that shrunk that down there pretty darn good. That may be a keeper there. Might be jumping the gun on this a little bit, but it is just an experiment. But I'd say that was a pretty good success. Boy, it got saw marks in this board right here, and that even transferred the saw marks into that. But I can cut this piece out and use it. I'd say that was a success. You see that's kind of rusty, grungy looking. I was just going to sandblast that and paint it and maybe reuse it, but since this works so well, this is what it looks like roughly trimmed up. This is the original piece, and this is the Kydex piece. That's actually usable the way it is. I may try to improve that a little bit more, but that's pretty good. Even transferred the blisters in here from the rust pockets and stuff on there. Even transferred that in there. Doesn't transfer, a little bit. You can see it a little bit on the outside there, but not too bad. So this piece that I molded off of this original Piper cover here actually turned out pretty good. I like that. There's some problems with it. It was kind of rough. This flange here has got a pretty good radius in it, which doesn't hurt anything at all. It'd actually be usable just the way it is. Of course, molding over that original winds up with this bigger, larger, and this is already pretty big. Plus it's kind of a square, uninspiring shape, although this looks a lot better with its rounded edges. And I thought I could do better. I could make something that formed a little nicer and maybe looked a little better. It was a little closer into the size of that pulley, because this thing's way big for, even this one is pretty large to cover up that pulley and cable. So I thought I'd try something here since everything was working out so well. I made up a mold. I'm going to try to make a new one, and one that's a little nicer looking. So this is just a piece of MDF. I set it up beside the cable and the pulley, and then I took a pencil and just kind of scribed a line around that, made it the shape of the pulley, and then I just kind of exaggerated a little bit. It's a little bit higher than what the pulley is and the cable. But I cut that out, and I took it on the belt sander and radiused it over here real nice on the front and the nose. I had to take a little bit of sandpaper and hand work this nose a little bit. But I used a single piece of MDF, 3/4 inch MDF wasn't wide enough, so I sistered on a couple pieces of 1/4 inch plywood just to widen this out. So that makes it plenty wide enough to clear that pulley and the cable and everything on the inside. Got it nailed onto a board. Well, the old advertisement says nothing says lovin' like something from the oven, so there's we go. I think my piece of Kydex is pretty soft. Well, I think I finally got it. It took me 3 or 4 tries. So I got a few little wrinkles right around there still. I couldn't get out, couldn't get to stay out, but I think that's pretty acceptable there. I think that'll work. We'll get that trimmed up and squared up and see how that goes. Okay, here's my version after it's been all trimmed up, and I think that looks pretty good. This is the first one I did that was molded off the metal one, and I think it looks pretty good too. Either one of them I think are better than this metal one. This is pretty heavy metal. That was 40 thousandths or better. It's steel, of course. It's just blunt on the back, so crap can slide down in underneath there. Square edges. This has more rounded edges on it. So this one would work. There's nothing wrong with it. I like it better than this one, but I think this one, put a couple of holes in there for some screws and screw that down, and that'll be pretty good, I think. Well, here's the rounded one. This is the pulley and the cable, elevator pulley and cable. There's the rounded one. That fits in there like that. It covers that hole pretty nice. Here's the Kydex square one. Either one of them are okay. This one comes down, can come down a little farther and cover that cable a little bit more and still cover the hole. Got lots of room side to side. Either one of them are good. I like both of them. But see, that one it's tapered down, and so the pulley sticks up here, and so you know, you can keep it back this way farther, and that leaves more of the cable exposed. If you bring it down, then it starts riding on the pulley. Where this one, I can bring it down and close that pulley in better and come farther down that cable. And that covers in like that. Doesn't, I guess it sticks up just as high as the old one did, but it just doesn't look like it's as obtrusive. It's rounded, smoother, but it also goes farther down this cable and protects it more. So that's all screwed in. That protects that hole. Now back here, there's all kinds of holes in these floorboards, and the problem is already I've lost a couple of screws and stuff down through those, washers or nuts or whatever. One of the problems with that is I use stainless steel hardware, and you can't stick a magnet down in there to pick it up. But there's a pretty good sized hole here around this where the seat attaches, and it's got to be that way because you have to be able to put a bolt through these holes through the bottom of the seat and then put a nut on there, and you have to be able to access that, both the front and the back. I want to see if I can fix something up for that, cover those holes up. And then there's a pretty good sized cavity here underneath this torque tube where this bearing comes out. Now there's not much I can do with this in front of here because that cable, that elevator cable, comes through there and then comes through this torque tube here. But I could maybe close this back up a little bit. Although that's not as bad of a deal there as this back one is, because it doesn't have feet over it. It's covered up by the seat. Back here on this bearing, you've got a big hole in front and a big hole in back. Now the reason I'm worrying about these holes here is not only do you get all kinds of debris in there from flying, earplugs and batteries and pencils and things like that all drop down there. That's a universal collection point in that belly. But we do all of our work on salt water, getting in and out. Even if we just stop on some place and stand on the floats, when we get back in, our feet drag in a little bit of salt water, and but then we're getting on and off in the dock. Those are usually covered with bird crap, and that gets transferred in here. You get off on a beach, then you got sand and sometimes mud. It all gets tracked in there no matter how careful you are. The worst culprit is the salt water coming off your shoes. Wash your feet off to get the crap off of them, the sand and the gravel and the salt and the mud and things like that, then you're still dragging in salt water. So try to keep that stuff from migrating down there to the belly as much as possible. I'll just try to close those holes in where that stuff can go through there.